Who is it?
Pizza delivery.
What? I didn't order any pizza.
Are you sure? I have the receipt right here in my pants.
Don't even think about it.
Shit, sir.
Hey everybody, this is Praxis, and today I want to share with you one of my favorite things here at the homestead, and that is this oven that is built in line with our wood stove and how we use it to make fresh homemade bread here. And tonight we're going to be making pizza. Now the end of the story ends here at the oven and it begins over in our kitchen. I want to bring you guys through the whole process. So if things end in the oven, where do they begin? Well, where they begin is with our yeast starter. This is a yeast starter that I've had for couple of years at this point. It's just in an old salsa container, and what is in here is some store-bought yeast from one of those regular yeast packets that you might buy at the grocery store. I put a little bit of that in, and I put two little scoops of flour and almost 2 little scoops of water in there. And what I do with this is once I mix that together, I set it into my refrigerator. I just let it sit for like a week or so, and it is a colony of yeast that I can just keep using over and over. When I want to use it, I take it out of the fridge after it's been in there for about a week or so. I dump it into a bowl. I add some flour and salt and whatever I might want to add to make bread in there, and then I want to feed what's left in here. I empty it all out, but there's always stuff left on the edges. I put 2 scoops of flour back in. I use whole wheat flour. I don't know if that's necessary, but that's always what I do. And almost 2 scoops of water back in. So 2 scoops flour, almost 2 scoops water, and then put it back into the fridge for another week, and it'll be ready for me to make bread next week. If you wanted to make bread more frequently than that, you can leave it out on your counter. I just do it in the fridge because it slows down the growth of the bacteria so that I don't have to make bread every single day. But if you want to make it more frequently, you can take it out more frequently than that. Once you mix your bread together, you get something like this. This is something that I mixed up yesterday. I took the yeast starter, put it in here. I added some white flour onto it, and I'll add like just extra things. Sometimes I'll add some oats, I'll add some salt to it. And if I happen to have finished up like a jar of salsa or a jar of pasta sauce or something like that, anything that has more food and nutrition in it that I think might bake nicely into bread, I will just mix some water in with that, shake the jars up and put them in here. I tend to find that the bread dough rises even better when I do that because I think, there's sugars in things like pasta sauce and the yeast loves the sugar. So this is something I made yesterday, and I'm about to turn it into little mini pizzas. I bought these little pans that I use in that oven because I can't put a full-size pizza pan in the oven over my wood stove. These were just a couple of dollars. I'll put links down in the description to any of the products that I talk about in this video, except unfortunately for that wood stove oven. That is something that is really hard to come by. It's made by I forget the name of the company. I'll tell you later on in the video when I'm looking right at it. But whenever I have contacted this company, they're always on back order, so that's the most difficult thing to get in the video. But something like this is pretty easy to grab. So I'm going to be using some of these guys. I'm going to separate my dough away from the side. Now I mentioned that when I make the dough, I just put in some white flour, I put in some pasta sauce. I didn't mention any volumes and quantities like I did with my yeast starter. Like I said, yeast starter is 1 part flour being added, 1 part water. So you're adding just about equal parts flour and water to it. I use those little scoops, which are about a quarter of a cup each. And I'm kind of precise about that, but in terms of the rest of this stuff, I'm not really precise about it at all. And the fact that my bread kind of always comes out, fine, suggests to me that you don't really have to be all that precise when it comes to measuring your ingredients. That might not be the case. It might be really important that you put in exactly the right amount of all these ingredients. And over the last years and decades of my life, when I've been not measuring at all, I've just gotten fabulously lucky over and over and over again. And I'm just like that person that's flipping a coin and it's come up heads like 500 times in a row. Statistically, that will happen to someone. So I could just be that guy, but I tend to think what's more likely is that you don't really have to be all that precise about a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of of room for error, and by that there suggests that there's a possibility of something being an error. I think that there's a very broad area that is acceptable, and if you go outside of that, it can be problematic, but you don't have to hit like a bullseye. This is exactly what you need to do to make good bread. There's a whole wide area where anything in there is going to work out pretty well. So here we got this. What I usually do for kneading with this is when I initially mix the ingredients together, I'll just kind of stir them around, leave them a little bit on the dry side so there's still a little bit of dry flour in the bowl, and I'll let that sit overnight, and then I'll just kind of knead it for a while until it kind of starts feeling like it has some doughy kind of consistency to it. I'll let it sit for several hours, more if it's cooler, less if it's in a warmer situation. I wait until it gets bigger, until it looks like it's risen a bit, and then it's ready to go. You could knead it more times. I guess I just kneaded it a little right there, but again, like sometimes I'll knead it an extra time and sometimes I won't. What I'm going to do with this is I'm going to chop this up into 3 pieces because we're going to do 3 pizzas tonight. So I cut it into 3 pieces, which I tried to get equal. This one's a little bit bigger than the other 2. But again, it's fine. It's going to work out totally fine. You don't have to worry about everything being perfect because there's that whole broad area where it's going to work out just fine for you. I'm throwing a little bit more flour on here just to make it easier to work with. I've got my Space Saver rolling pin hooked right up in there. And I roll it on one side for a while until it starts sticking to the rolling pin or sticking to the counter, and then add a little flour on top, dust it around, flip it, and then go the other way. I find that after you're rolling it on one side for a while, it tends to not want to stretch anymore. And whenever you get to that point where it feels like it's not really wanting to stretch anymore, you just give it a little powdering and flip it over, and by flipping it over, you're something about the structure is more amenable to being stretched after you've flipped it. And it also gives you an opportunity to put some of that flour on there. So we're still going. It's feeling like it's sticking a little, so I'm going to flip it again. And we're getting it just to be about the size of those pans. If it's a little bit smaller, that's fine. If it's a little bigger, that's fine. We don't have to worry about it being perfect because there's a whole broad area that is going to be totally acceptable. One thing about adding the pasta sauce in, gives it a nice kind of tomato basil kind of taste to the bread too, which I think is nice. One of my favorite stores to shop at is like this, Salvation Army and Goodwill, and it's not just because the prices are really inexpensive. It's also because when you go there, it's always kind of a little bit of a surprise. You don't really know what you're gonna find when you get there. It's like a box of chocolates in that regard. And I always find that kind of exciting. It's like, what treasures am I gonna find here today? Maybe it's gonna be a real score, maybe I won't find anything. Well, I find it's similar with bread when you're just adding like different things in there. Sometimes you do something and it's really surprising and wonderful. And I like those little surprises. Here's the tray. I've got some oil on here already. I'm just going to give it a tiny bit of extra oil. I've got this little silicone brush here that I use to spread the oil around on there. But I find what works even more effectively than the oil for preventing the bread from sticking is putting a little bit of cornmeal on there. And it doesn't have to be like spread like totally uniformly or anything like that, just some little speckles like that on there. It's kind of like adding perforations to it, so when you want it to come up later, you get some breaking points. So I'm taking my bread, flopping it onto the pan here, and it's not a perfect fit. I mean, this side's kind of coming off a little bit too far. It's a little shy on some of the sides. So what I'm going to do is just kind of stretch it out a little bit and work it into the pan so it roughly fills up the space. And that's pretty good like that. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to set this out, and I'll leave it covered either with a bowl dome or something like that. Usually I'll take some drying racks so I don't put any cloth right on the dough itself so it doesn't stick. But I'll set a couple of these out and I'll let them sit for like 2 hours, 3 hours. Again, it kind of depends on the time. You could just put that right in the oven right like that, put the toppings on it, and it would be fine. But if you let it sit out for a while, it's going to be a little bit fluffier. But again, it's that whole range. If you want like a crust that's a little bit firmer, put the toppings on right now, throw it in. If you want crust that's a little fluffier, let it sit for a while. It's really, there's no such thing as perfect. People always are, asking me, it's like, well, what's your favorite this and what's your favorite that? My favorite is variety, to be honest. So, if it doesn't come out the exact same way every time, that's a good thing. You get some variety of experience. So we're gonna set these out. I have to do 2 more of those. You don't need to see that. The next step I wanna share with you is what kind of toppings we're gonna be putting on this, and then finally the baking stage. The pizza's been rising for about an hour or so, and we could certainly let it rise more, but at this point it seems like it's pretty good. So I'm gonna set that off to the side and start thinking about the toppings, and this is what we usually use. We start with a pasta sauce. Now you can buy specific pizza sauce things, and they tend to be a little spicier and maybe a thicker consistency. I just get this pasta sauce. This particular type is kind of spicy to begin with. It is a little bit more watered down than a pizza sauce generally would be, but I just kind of don't care about it, and it's less expensive, I find, and it's organic, and it tastes good, and everybody's happy with it, nobody complains. So this is what we tend to use. I use some oregano and basil, just dried, that we're gonna be shaking on there. I put a little bit of salt on the pizza to bring the flavor out, and these are organic onions and organic broccoli and organic garlic. The garlic we grew in our garden last year. The other ones are things that I bought. And we have some shredded cheddar that I shredded myself, and some mozzarella that I also shredded myself. I always start by putting on the pasta sauce, and I just drizzle a little bit on there like that. And there's a special tool that I like to use to spread the pasta sauce. It's called a bamboo spoon that broke, and I tore the other half of it off, and then used a sander to smooth all this out. And aside from it just being a nice way to preserve a spoon and make it so that I don't throw it out, I really find it's actually kind of a nice tool. I prefer it over using a full spoon. I don't know exactly why, and using a full spoon is totally fine. If I had a full spoon in front of me, I wouldn't complain about using it. But whenever I am in a position where I can choose between using this half spoon and a full spoon, I always just tend to grab this because, I don't know, I kind of like using it. Put the last little bits on there. I'm gonna put a little bit of salt on. Oregano, same way. Basil, and I buy all these spices in bulk. That is good for my prepper pantry, to have lots and lots of stuff. It also saves me a bunch of money. Some of these onions on here, we're making 3 pizzas tonight, so I want to use just a third for each pizza. We're going to add some broccoli on there. Sprinkle the garlic around. I froze this garlic. It lasted in my root cellar for a while, but then it finally started to look like it was going bad, so I just peeled what was left and froze it, and that seemed like it preserved it really well. Cheddar cheese, and I have mozzarella cheese, and I always finish with the mozzarella cheese because when you put mozzarella cheese into a nice hot oven, it tends to crisp up and brown up nicely, and the cheddar doesn't do that. So if you leave the mozzarella on the top, it'll leave you with a nice brown, kind of crispy top. Not that it particularly matters, but I think it does add to the texture, having that kind of crispiness on the top there. So we're going to save the mozzarella for the last ingredient. And this brings us to the final step, which is tossing the pizzas into the oven. Now, I've modified this oven a little bit from the way that I received it from the manufacturer, and I promised you I'd let you know who the manufacturer was. It says it right on the front of it. It says Cylinder Stoves from Chester, Utah. And their phone number is 1-800-586-3829. They put that right on there as well. And I don't mind them putting the advertising on the front because this is a wonderful tool. It's really hard to get things like this. It captures the free energy that is just going up your chimney flue that you would be having anyway if you're heating your house, and it turns it into something that you can use another time. And I love the idea, you're heating, you're burning the wood to heat your house, and you're also getting to cook pizzas with it. Simultaneously, I'm cooking chili for tomorrow. I also have some tea going on there. Heating your house with wood is just a great way of getting so many different things done at the same time, in addition to the just emotional, wonderful, warm and cozy kind of feeling of having a wood stove. Whenever you're out in the winter and you come back in and it's really cold, your cold fingers, cold feet, whatever, it's one thing to go into a warm house and it's like, oh, it's climate controlled 70 degrees in here. Now I can slowly thaw. It's another to be able to walk right up to a wood stove and just put your hands right in front of it and you warm up right away. It is an enormously higher quality of life. And again, like I said at the beginning, people are always kind of taking a crap on prepping, talking about how it's like, oh, those people live in fear and they're not living their lives. We are living our lives to the absolute highest possible potential that a human life can be when you're comparing that to, like I said, that person that comes in from the cold and they got their climate controlled whatever and they're like still got kind of a sweater on. And here I am, I'm literally wearing a bathing suit right now, right in front of the wood stove, and it is warm, comfortable, inviting, and it's a human way to live, to warm yourself up near the glowing warmth of a fire. But let's stop delaying. I'm seeing the temperature on the side of this thing says 300 degrees. It's a little on the cool side, but you read a recipe book and it's like, it needs to be 375 degrees for, whatever. Again, there's a ballpark there. I want to warm that up. I actually threw another log in the fire, trying to get it to warm up a little bit. Anywhere between like 300 to, honestly like 600 degrees in this thing makes really, really nice pizza. The problem is that 600 degrees is getting into the unsafe range. You don't want to run it at that high of a temperature. But anywhere in there is going to be fine. I usually like to aim for somewhere between 400 and 500 degrees. And I'll be adding a little bit of wood to the fire just to get us up there. So it's got this little latch here. Now I mentioned I modified this a little bit. What I modified is I made these little racks that go in. It came with some like kind of baking racks in there. They were non-stick. Not cool. But I added these little just metal racks. I kind of did my own hardware so they could slide onto the little rack holders on the side. And these allow me to put in 2 pizzas at the same time. When this thing arrived, I could kind of do one at a time, but this works a lot better. Got one on the top, one on the bottom, and I'll just leave this in for some undetermined amount of time. I'm going to set the timer for like 7 minutes or something like that, and I'll pop in and I'll check it again. Recipe books are always very precise, and I guess for people who don't feel confident enough to wing it, that's a nice way to kind of get you into the water. You put your life preserver on and it's like at least you get the people swimming. But the reality is you don't need to wear the life preserver all the time. It is possible to learn how to actually swim. And once you've been cooking for a while, using recipe books, exactly this number of degrees for this number of seconds at this amount of atmospheric pressure, once you kind of acclimate yourself to that, you can really feel free to work within that. You got shoulder room in here. It doesn't have to be like walking down a narrow corridor and you got your shoulders tucked in. You can spread your arms, you can try some things. By opening this, I dumped a bunch of air out of it. I'm gonna throw some more wood in here so I can try to jack this thing up more to the 400 degree range. And I'm just gonna let you guys see what the pizza looks like when it comes out. I don't know what it looks like right now because I haven't seen it, but I'm anticipating you're looking at a very inviting piece of food that doesn't at all look like it was made in like some kind of ramshackle place where people are suffering and they're not living a high quality life. You can make some really, really wonderful stuff over your wood stove with free energy that is just going up the flue anyway. It's a great way to maximize what you are getting. A stick falls on the ground outside, and here we can turn that into delicious pizza. That's it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for new videos all the time, and if you'd like to support this channel, you can do so either through Patreon or PayPal.